Plot Part 1 dealt with the static plot appreciations. In other words, plot story points that remain the same over the course of the story. They do not change, like the goal, the consequences, the requirements, the forewarnings, prerequisites, preconditions, dividends, and costs. Each one was explained in full, and each one had video clips to illustrate how those particular story points were used and appeared in well-known motion pictures as examples. Tonight, we're going to be dealing with a second kind of plot point, the progressive plot points. Those are the ones that change over time, like acts, scenes, sequences, and events. Each one of those is a different level of resolution that is a wheel within a wheel in your plot. So rather than looking at your plot as being a consistent, long, and continuous linear chain of events, you want to look at it as wheels within wheels as the cogs turn and bring into conjunction different kinds of considerations, dramatic considerations, that then create dramatic potential between them. Altogether, when everything has been compared to everything else, you've moved through all of the acts of your story, and in addition, you also have completely explored the issue at the heart of your story. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing we want to do is reiterate the differentiation we made during last week's program, that plot is not just a series of events in the finished story, because the order in which you reveal the events to your audience can actually be quite different than the order in which the events actually supposedly happened in the story. For example, in Pulp Fiction or Remains of the Day, you'll be able to see a completely different order of exposition, a different order of unfolding the events for the audience than you'll see in the actual order that occurred within the story itself. It's that internal logic of the story that Dramatica refers to as plot. And the other order, the order in which you reveal it, is part of story weaving, some of the storytelling techniques that are used in order to interest the audience and to keep the delivery of information to them fresh and compelling. We'll have a special class on story weaving later in this series of programs, but tonight we're covering the progressive plot appreciations, having covered the static ones last week. Okay, progressive plot appreciations. Well, the first thing we want to do is establish what we mean by an act. An act is the highest level, or should I say the largest block of movable time in a story. And an act has many different definitions. If you talk about a stage play, an act means one thing. Even in some novels, you find acts being used by name. A story in a novel will actually be divided into acts, although they may never be named that. They'll have the same dramatic feel for an audience, the same feeling of completing one area of exploration in a story and moving into another. You know, you can tell when you watch a movie or when you read a book that some major turning point occurs, and that everything that came before was building up to that turning point, and now that the story has actually turned, we're involved in a whole different area of exploration, a different kind of activity perhaps. That's what an act break is. It's these large, ham-handed, bold stroke completions of major categories of exploration moving into the next area of exploration in the story. Now, how many acts are there? And can we define them a little more clearly as to what an act actually comprises? How many acts are there? This many acts. 4. 4 fingers, 4 acts. Why do we say 4 acts? Well, I'll get to it in a moment why we see there being 4 acts in a story, as we can plot them on the Dramatica structural chart and actually see why the audience feels that there are 4 acts that need to be explored. It's a desire on the audience's part to have 4 acts in the story. But what about a 3-act structure? Well, let's look at those fingers here. Yeah, here we go. There we go. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, 4 fingers, 4 acts. Now those 4 acts have 3 different spans between them. So if we label the acts A, B, C, and D, then we might label these spanning areas in between them 1, 2, and 3. Now what does all this mean to story? In a story, these we call in Dramatica signposts, and these we call journeys. Because A, B, C, and D, those are the different kinds of subject matter that have to be explored to completely surround the issue of the story. But They're only talking about what kind of subject matter it is. It doesn't describe the exploration itself. They are like signposts. You're starting in city A, you want to end up in city B, and you have to go through city D, and you want to go through cities B and C to get there. You have to make that journey. And the journey is divided in going from signpost A to signpost B is journey 1. Signpost B to signpost C is journey 2, and signpost C to signpost D is journey 3.